Sure, everything's behaving. Live here. Are we live over here? We are. All right, we hit the button. Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about the new Diablo game. Before we do the Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, it's pretty simple. We like to talk about games, and this is maybe a return to form after like 80 billion years. Okay. After 80 billion years of fucking Fast and Furious movies, finally we're getting into the good stuff. We're talking about a new big AAA release. We're talking about Diablo. I don't know about you, but I'm excited to get into it. This is like, I don't know, this is maybe the most excited for like a game I have been in a long time.
Yeah, so just to give you a little bit of perspective, I'll talk about this more in the back half, but my weekend was split between this game and Street Fighter 6, which came out at the same time. Technically, Diablo 4 released 18 minutes ago, but we both obviously paid for the 4 days of early access or whatever, which in retrospect, maybe I shouldn't have that way. I could have spent more time with Street Fighter 6, but yeah. So actually, maybe that's a good place to start. How do you feel about this kind of? I feel like it's a trend now of paying for like an upgraded version to get a couple days of early access. How do you feel?
So so the question for me was whether or not I was going to do the battle pass. Right, the upgraded version came with the battle pass, and I was like, okay, well, if the answer is I'm going to do the battle pass, then that's a good deal, right? The 4 days is essentially free, right? Just like kind of an upside. But if I was unsure about doing the battle pass, I would have skipped it. Obviously we were doing this for the cast, and when you pitched it, I was like, oh, I didn't think about it, but yeah, sure, we'll do that for the cast. But I think in general I would have done it anyway, because one of my things about these battle passes is I like to kind of make this decision right at the start, right at the beginning, to go, oh yes, I want to do this, right? So yeah, no, that was kind of my, I don't know, that was kind of my approach to things.
Yeah. So did you go for the middle tier? I went for the middle tier.
Yeah, I did not go for that insane. The cosmetics and stuff, I care a little bit about that. There are some times where you can win me over with that stuff. I'm trying to think of like a good example of that.
For me, it's like for WoW, right? It's like I'm probably going to be playing for 6 months, and you'll get me to upgrade to the 6-month subscription to get the cosmetics associated with that.
Yeah, or I have bought collector's editions of certain WoW expansions because I like the collector's edition mounts that come with them. It's like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like I wanted the Battle for Azeroth Raptor, the Kultiran, whatever the horse, right, with the like regalia, the like Admiral's regalia, and because I was on board with all of that stuff, it was easy for me to sort of like pick up that version of the game. But in general, I don't think I wouldn't have paid money. I would not have paid an extra $10 or $20 in order to get 4 days of a head start.
Yeah, no, I think I generally agree with you on that, right? Like for me, it was kind of like I will try the first battle pass, and if it sucks, so I won't get the second one, right? Unfortunately, I'm in a position to be able to afford that and it not be an issue. In general, I guess I don't really have like I don't know. It just feels kind of weird that essentially like you pay $10 more and you get like the game released effectively, like they call it 4 days of early access, but the game really released last Friday, right? Like
Yeah.
And everybody else just had to wait 4 days. I don't know. It feels a little weird to me, but not so weird that I'm mad about it, if that makes sense. Also, it's not like yes, like Battle Pass hasn't started yet. Or maybe it has in the past 20 minutes, but it didn't start with the early access release or whatever it was. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it so much. Again, like I'm not mad about it. It just feels kind of it feels a little bit dirty to me, but just a little bit.
Yeah, it is complicated because something that something that like WoW people would talk about sometimes is the danger of FOMO, right?
Yeah,
Which is this idea that like if you make something unequal, you kind of run this risk, shall we say, of inducing FOMO in your audience, and that's like a really like poor, unfun way to design
sure.
or make your title. Um, and I think I am on board with that a little bit. But I also think that it sort of doesn't matter, right? And that that's kind of like made up bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing you're pointing at, I think I generally agree with you, is that like FOMO is a real thing, right? Like FOMO.
Yeah.
I mean, most famously, FOMO uh, is a term that like really got into popularity a couple of years ago around like one of the crypto booms, right? Like buying it at the last minute and then like losing a bunch of money because of FOMO or whatever, which is like
Yep.
the most pernicious version of this, right? But like FOMO is a real thing. It's just how much of it is okay, right?
Hmm.
Like obviously with something like an investment, crypto or stock or otherwise, right? Like that's not something somebody did on purpose. But with something like with like generally, but something like this, right? Like there is like a trade off there, right? Like something like the titles, like the big patch title, like
AOTC, KSM, right?
yeah, yeah. Or I was thinking of like the Pathfinder one at the end of the last expansion, right? Like that's a lot of like there is some FOMO there, but like there's also value there, right? Like that you bother
Hmm.
to do the content within the allotted time frame, right? So that's generally seen as like an acceptable trade-off, right? Um and to that end, I think in terms of this, right? This 4 days of early access didn't have a lot of FOMO to it outside like it's just kind of like you get to play the game a couple days early, right? Like I said, Battle Pass isn't running. It's not like there's some time gated thing, um, other than like maybe like of like in 10 years Blizzard takes the service offline, right? But like that's like not a thing you're thinking about when you do this. Um, so from that perspective, I think it's less of a problem.
Yeah, I also think, and this is something that I don't know if it's a real consideration, but it occurred to me. I also think that it's a really clever way to split your player base on launch,
Oh
right?
yeah,
And basically say only half of you can do this, can assault these servers at the same time. We are sitting down to record the podcast, right? Because we've had 4 days to play Diablo, right? It's not like I'm itching to do it, right? But I have friends who have been waiting for this moment, and they just all logged in and logged on to Diablo to make their Diablo characters because for them this is the launch moment, right? And I
yeah.
think that that's a reasonably clever way to sort of misalign the natural tendency, which is to just like link all of your players together and assault the servers with this huge influx that will kind of never be seen again.
Very famously at the launch of Diablo 3, Error
Yeah.
37 was a thing, right? Like it was kind of one of the first kind of big servers destroyed at launch games type things that happened, especially since it was like the first online required Diablo game. Um
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, the drama surrounding that versus the lack of drama surrounding this, I think is actually really notable.
Yeah.
I titled my announcement "The Return of Blizzard Polish," just kind of because it has been a while since I felt like this is the kind of game that people sort of expect out of Blizzard. Like, obviously, there's a lot of damage that's happened to that brand over
Yeah.
the years, right?
Right.
But when I think about like the release of StarCraft 2, right? This is sort of the same thing that I felt. Or even the release of like really like hype WoW expansions, right? Legion would be a good example of one. Honestly, but most WoW expansions these days tend to be like pretty like just like good in terms of technical proficiencies, right? Are they just kind of like getting things right or whatever? But just the level of polish in Diablo 3 is really impressive to me. Um, and so, yeah, I don't know. It's something that I stood out, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's get into it. Right, enough
Sure.
metatextual commentary about
Yeah.
the nature of purchasing the game. So what are your impressions? We spoke briefly before the start. We're both about halfway through Act 3, or I don't know. I guess we could be more than that, but because I don't know where Act 3 ends. But we're partway through Act 3.
Yeah, do you know how many acts there are? Are there 6?
I I don't know, but I saw that one of my friends had gotten the achievement for finishing Act 5 yesterday. So,
Okay. Yeah, I definitely know there are at least 5,
5.
but yesterday I saw someone ask, "How many chapters are there in Diablo?" And somebody answered 6. And I was like, "Do they mean acts?"
Yeah, I
But
mean, they might be called they might be called chapters in this game. Um, because I think like the first 3 chapters you can kind of do from the get-go, right? Like after you do the
yep.
opening thing, you get access to all 3. I'm actually curious, did you run to the to get your class feature
Mm-mm.
at level
It took
15?
me I did all of Act 1 sort of, back to back. I didn't even know about, to be honest, the barbarian thing. And then I got I think I saw like a piece of what's it called, text, like, like I saw like a tooltip, or not a tooltip, but like a tip screen thing
Yeah.
that was like, starting at level 15 barbarians can get their quest. I was like, oh, what the fuck is that? And then I like looked in my journal and I saw the quest for it, and I was like, oh, let me go do this, right? And so I went and I did that, and then I went back and I did Act 2.
So, funnily enough, I basically did the same thing, but I did it on purpose. Where I'm like, I'll get in that, like, because I thought that was like the start of Act 2 when I would get that, and then like when I hit the start of Act 2, I'm like, I still don't have it. I'm like, I'll just fucking run over here. I think, luckily for barbarians, most of that feature is kind of unlocked
Yeah.
immediately, right? Like, you just kind of get to
Excuse
pick the
me.
bonus one with the with the class feature, whereas I think the other classes are a little bit more involved. Which is I remember from the beta. Fun facts for the audience: we're both playing barbarians, so we can't really talk about any of the
Yeah,
other
I had
classes.
intended to spend time last night playing something else. I was like, I'm gonna just like put a couple levels into sorcerer just so I can, kind of like cross, you know, have a little extra perspective. But I didn't do that. I just played more barbarian. I just sat and I listened to a video and I ran a dungeon. I like just happened to run past a dungeon. I was like, you know what? I would rather fucking do this. And like that is maybe the best. That's honestly maybe the best thing that has felt good about Diablo is just like the freedom to just sort of do whatever I want and have so much to explore and experience at any individual kind of moment, right? Like if I want to chase down story quests, which has generally been my focus, right? Most of the time I am running down story quests, but every once in a while, like I'll run past a dungeon. I ran past a stronghold, and I did a stronghold, which was really hard actually. I actually bankrupted myself. I spent all of my gold on repairs because I was doing this stronghold at level 23 and the stronghold was built for like level 27 or something. I was like just a little under, but I was like, I can get there. I can get there kind of thing. And and I just kept dying. The boss was hard. The final boss was really hard, and I kept dying. And I eventually had less than 1,000 gold, and I couldn't repair. And I had a thing that all of my stuff was like, "You're the next time you die, you're gonna your stuff will be broken." I was like, I don't even know what do I do at that point, right? But I killed the boss and I got a bunch of money and I repaired and it was fine. But so that's kind of been my approach. Like, have you been just hardlining the story? Are you doing some of these events and map quests, like stuff like that?
So I do events sometimes when I run past them. I do sellers when I walk past sellers, just because I think
Mhm.
like that I think was a good formalization. This was like a thing that kind of appeared in Diablo 3. Like there'd be doors to sellers and there'd be little
Yep.
events in them. Um, uh, What else? So I have been doing a fair amount of side quests, but like at some point I was like, okay, I'll put these side quests off to later and I'll just do more story. But then I filled up my side quest log, and so like I'm at like constantly like 17 or 18 segments. I'm like, oh, I need to go knock off some of these side quests so I can pick up more side quests so that when I finish the game I can go back and do them. Because for whatever reason, I can't let myself leave the blue exclamation mark on the map. I need to pick it up. And so because I need to pick it up, I need to go clear out a couple side quests and come back. Or like,
That's funny. Yeah, I have left the side quest B because my expectation is I will level some of my other characters mostly through side quests, events, that kind of thing.
yeah, I mean, so I kind of I feel like you do that individually for each character, right? Like plan on doing everything on this character. Historically, as you know, Buddy well knows, I'm sure our hardcore viewers know, I don't really do alts. So like I might do a druid at some point. So I did sorcerer, rogue, and druid in the betas separately. I did like the sorcerer and the rogue just through the intro part, and I did the druid for like the server slam up to level 20, and I didn't like them as much as the barbarian, so I went with the barbarian. But it's just like one of those things where it's like I'm not gonna do anything. Like I'm mostly gonna do this guy. And the side quests are good content too, right? Like some of them are like just kind of like go here, kill this, but some of them are kind of involved, and some of them have like really like decent stories. There are a couple that are like I would say like very good. A lot of them are kind of though like they hit me, but they're also kind of like this is Diablo. Everything sucks in the world of Diablo, and pretty predictably like. I'd say it's not as bad as I expected, but like 7 or 8 times out of 10, just assume the worst outcome. And that is what happened, right? Like, it's like, I have not seen my brother. He is off to the north. Go check on him, please. And he's dead, right? Like, or worse sometimes, right? Like, but there's some,
Yep.
like, you are far enough along in Corvashad. There is a quest that like pops up inside of the town. Did you do that one by any chance?
I did one side quest just to sort of see what it was like. It was a courier, like there was like a courier outside of town who hadn't delivered his tithe to the cathedral or something like
Okay.
that. And you just go there, you find the guy, you bring it. That's sort of all that happens. So I have not done any other side quests besides that one.
Okay. No, that makes that makes sense. I've been doing like a handful of them. Some of them are kind of like that like that courier thing. I think is just kind of like a breadcrumb quest to get you to I think it's Margrave. And then you pick up other quests there. And like some of them bring me to dungeons, right? Like I have not really done a dungeon independently, but there are a handful of side quests that will bring you to a dungeon to do. And I will get the things. Funnily enough, I think all the ones but one have been for abilities that my class can't use. Because you run a dungeon and you get like an affix. So I've been doing a mix of stuff, but it's been pretty good so far, I would say.
You're playing on World Tier 2, I'm assuming,
yes,
right?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
Are you?
Hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm probably gonna swap over to Tier 3. It says like when you hit level 50, swap to Tier 3. I was like, that's fine. I'm down for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then when you're 70 plus or whatever, you go to Tier 4. So I don't know. Like I don't think I'm an amazing Diablo player. Obviously, I die a lot, and I'm not playing a hardcore character.
Yeah,
But I do think that I'm probably a reasonably veteran player. I know how to create a build. Some of my builds have been good, some of my builds have been less successful on barbarian. But like in general, I just feel like veteran or whatever world tier 2 is probably the right spot for somebody like me.
I think I agree. I'm curious. Let's get into this nitty gritty a little bit. What kind of builds have you been running? Because for me, I have the one that I designed from the ground up that I like a lot, but I've basically been running builds based around the current legendaries I'm holding.
Oh yeah, so I have been running builds entirely around the legendaries and the items holding, right? So for a long time, basically, if I ever got an item that said you gain +1 rank of ability, I would pick up that ability, and try and hodgepodge something together, right? Generally speaking, that has not been that hard, just because, like, most of the abilities that you end up picking up you can kind of slot in various different places. So at first, and it's also about the items that I get, right? So for instance, my first legendary was a two-handed sword, right? And so all of a sudden I was like, oh, I want to use my sword, I want to deal slashing damage, right? And so I'm going to drop something like bash that wants you to deal bludgeoning damage, or frenzy that wants you to be dual wielding, right? And I'm going to pick up flay, I think is what it was called, right? That like puts a bleed on it. And then I did this whole like bleed build or whatever. I did my first build was sort of a bash build. That's just what I started with. I got my first rare was a hammer, and I was just like, okay, cool. Now I'm just gonna go hard for this hammer shit. And it's basically just to be honest with you, I don't sort of know what I was doing then. I didn't have a great this was like super early, right? It was basically just bash and hammer of the ancients at that time. Um, and then but pretty quickly I picked up this bleed build that I actually liked a lot, and I probably spend most of my time with. The idea with the bleed build was I was using either it was all it was always flay, but it was either rend or whirlwind, kind of depending on circumstances, right? Whirlwind is obviously good for packs, Rend was good for bosses. But then I gave myself like a bazillion thorns, because you know there's a passive for that in the barbarian tree. And then your thorns bleed, like auto bleed people. Your flay is auto bleeding people. Or I'm sorry, your flay is giving you more thorns, which is bleeding people. You're reducing your damage intake. I had a legendary that was the number of people around you who are bleeding reduce your damage taken by a percentage, right? So I just kind of became this like fucking tank monster who could never ever die because I was constantly surrounded by bleeding targets taking way less damage. And then I had the ability rupture, which can heal you for, it activates a bleed, it heals you for a bunch kind of thing. That was honestly just the most fun because it is a fun fantasy, I guess, to let people hit you a lot and they fucking die. Honestly, I
Break yourself
probably
upon my
think
body.
yes, exactly. I probably think the bleeds themselves didn't matter that much. It was mostly the thorns. Like if I were to look at my damage breakdown, I probably did more damage with thorns than anything else because I basically never ever dealt damage to distant enemies. I just let them kill themselves by shooting me, right? And anyway, so that was probably my most successful build. That was like I did a lot. That was the build that I used when I beat that boss. That was really hard. I actually kind of I tweaked a lot with my build in order to get there because I really needed sustain and I really needed to lower my damage intake. And so I did a lot of stuff to like make that kind of work out. But then I would end up doing some other stuff. I did a frenzy build for a while because I just got two good dual wielding weapons. This is maybe the worst build I did was the frenzy build, just because I felt like I had no survivability. I was just fucking dying constantly, and I had basically nothing keeping me alive. And also, I did not like double slice, right, which is like this sweeping cone move in front of you that's like built for dual wielding. I didn't get it. It didn't connect with me. It felt like it didn't do enough damage. Frenzy also didn't feel like it dealt any damage, and I just sort of I didn't know what I was doing with that one. And then when I hit ultimates and capstones, I got a big hammer again, and I transitioned back to a stun bash build, right? Where I'm using foot stomp, I'm using charge, I'm using kick to stun guys into walls and stuff like that. And the big capstone of that one is that I took the key talent that your core abilities do way more damage, but they take way more fury or whatever.
Right.
And now I have upheaval, right? So mostly I'm just walking around, bash, 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 and then I have a giant upheaval, and I just I just woomph them for like a billion damage. That's the build that I'm running right now. It's fun. It's fun. I'm having a good time. The one thing I have not done is experiment with other ultimates. I've only used Call of the Ancients, where you summon the three guys. It is my favorite thing. I like my boys. I like summoning my boys. I summon my boys a lot. They are fun. I have not done anything else.
Yep. So fair enough. So I did a version of the bash build for a while. So as was something I basically did, or as I was getting up, but once I hit ultimates, I did the one where you do like 3 hits with each of your weapons, and so
Oh, sure.
I really liked conceptually the weapon swapping build, right? So I did that before I had any legendaries that like pointed me in a direction. So I did bash or so I either did the like the frenzy into Hammer of the Ancients or Upheaval, and then my slicing weapon on my other two skills. I really like Death Blow as a skill, so like that's kind of
Oh,
the cut.
yeah, okay. I did do death blow for a long time. One of the things I did with my bleed build was I did death blow.
Mm,
So I would rend a whole group of guys and then just death blow, death blow, death blow. Because if you like, as long as you can keep training them, death blow is like really good. But I had to drop it because it's useless on boss fights, right? Because
yeah,
you never get a killing reset.
I mean it does 100% extra damage if you take the passive for
Yeah,
it.
that's true.
Um, I like it enough that I keep it, but like that's a candidate to go. But like, so I was doing that weapon swap build for a while, but then I got a hammer that does it's if Call of the Ancients is on your action bar, when you leap, upheaval, and I forget or the third one, you essentially have like a chance to summon one of the dudes for like a second.
Oh my god, that sounds amazing. I want that
Yeah.
so bad.
So right now I'm running um upheaval, leap, Call of the Ancients, and stomp with like or ground stomp or whatever
Cooldown reduction.
with the
Yeah.
cooldown reduction. And so just kind of like feeding the whirlwind. Like neither of these builds are particularly good against bosses just because like bosses require a different type of damage. So it's not my favorite for that, but it is fun. So I
You know, funny enough, the upheaval build I think is really good against bosses. I think to be fair, I would probably swap upheaval for maybe Hammer of the Ancients, but maybe not. The thing about the build with bosses is Bash is insane against bosses because you get so many staggers. I fought the act 2 what should we do about spoilers? I fought the act 2 boss. We'll just call it that.
spoiler warning for mild spoilers for Diablo. It's Diablo,
Yeah, okay.
right?
The Act 2 boss is a demon named Astaroth. I fought Astaroth with this upheaval build. And I actually just kind of fucking owned him because when you take the bash passive that stuns every fourth hit, you are just constantly building stagger on this guy. I also have kick and I have charge and I have foot stomp, which are also all abilities that stagger like opponents, right? So you just get into these situations where you down them and you just fucking wail on them so often. And the upheaval just does so much damage because there's the upheaval passive that says that every hit it does 10% more damage. That's really good in groups because you can basically foot stomp, auto stack yourself to 10 and then upheaval a whole stunned group and they're all dead, right? um or actually, the better version of this is to kick one guy through a million other guys, which gives them all vulnerable, and then upheaval, because each one of those collisions counts as a hit for the
Uh,
sake of stacking the upheaval 30% damage buff kind of thing. Um, but yeah, maybe I would swap that out for Hammer of the Ancients, because I also know that a Hammer of the Ancients is a little more localized, right? You don't
yeah.
get the big wide AOE, but um,
So
it does a bunch of damage.
part of that is for so upheaval. The way it works with the passive is I'm not taking the stacking damage passive
Oh,
because
okay.
I want to be using it super frequently because I want to be procking the ancient to show up and do his own upheaval. And
Oh, yes. I see.
yeah, so I am trying to maximize my casts of upheaval, and so at that point I don't want to wait for it.
So what is your keystone talent that you're taking?
The berserking one, but only because it's the only one that made sense, right? Like I'm doing a little bit of berserking stuff, but not a ton.
Does
Uh,
Deathblow berserk you? Is that why?
Deathblow berserks me, and then I took one of the passives that makes my cores berserk me as well.
Okay.
Um, I wasn't running berserk, but like the weapon stitching one doesn't make any sense. The increased fury one doesn't make sense if I wanted to be doing rapid cast. And I wasn't doing any bleeds, so bleed one doesn't make any sense. So I wasn't super happy with. I'm not super happy with my key passive, but it's like a point, so I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, the key passives are maybe the most disappointing piece of Diablo character design. Just because they feel like they should be this capstone thing that really ties the whole build together, and they kind of don't. Uh, it sort of reminds me of the opposite of what I would describe the WoW talent trees to be like, at least the ones that I've experienced, right? Where when you get down to the bottom of a WoW talent tree and you're getting your kind of big you get into those sections of talents, right? So for arms, you have on the left side you have Mortal Strike, on the middle one you have Blade Storm, on the right one you have Execute, and you have these big, powerful capstone talents, right, that are you know, adding a lot of value to kind of how you're approaching, you know, any individual situation. I haven't felt that about the capstones for barbarian. It felt like ultimates were sort of that, right, when I was unlocking my you know, my ultimates. But yeah, I
I,
do want to try the weapon switching build. I have yet to do that, but I think it would be fun.
yeah, no, I think I would agree with you in the general case that like it is that's like I think the problem is that the key passives are like they are they're kind of static and weird and like they don't like the real key passives are the legendary weapon affixes, right? Like and so
Mhm.
that's much more controlling than the ones in in the tree, but like it's not too big. Like it's just a point, so I don't feel
Yeah.
too bad about it, right? Like you can't even rank them up if you wanted to. Um, uh, but yeah, do do.
What did you do when you did the weapon switching build? What was that like?
So I would do either bash or frenzy for my and it depended on what I had on my duels because sometimes I would bash with two with my dual wield, and then I would do upheaval or double slice for my core build. I actually liked double slice with the vulnerability just because like it'd be like bash, double slice, execute. And that's like all three of my weapons.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that.
Um, and so that was kind of the core loop. I had stomp there uh, for reducing the cooldown again because like so the weapon switching passive for those of you that don't know is you get a damage buff like I think it's like 6%. You get a smaller damage buff when you're using. If you hit with your dual wield, you get a damage buff with your dual wield. If you activate all three, you get 15% on all of them. And the ultimate, there's an ultimate that like attach, change your weapon, do 3 attacks, and it auto activates that passive because it's like first with your bludgeon, then with your slashing two handed, then with your dual wield. And so the easiest for me is keeping up the double the dual weapons and the bludgeoning, and then I had charge and execute on my two-handed slashing weapon. And I had been going in and manually setting which one does
Yeah.
which. Like because like now that I don't really care about that, I'm just having it auto assign, right, which is probably slightly more effective because like I'm actively giving up DPS to activate this passive because my weapons aren't particularly in parity. I feel like this is a build like that build will do better when you're closer to cap and like your weapons are closer in power level to each other, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, I feel you.
um
Yeah, the interesting thing there is there's also the passive that says you gain fury every time you swap weapons. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting, right? Because you could do something like frenzy, hammer of the ancients, death blow, assigning one to each of the three of them, right? And you just kind of go 1, 2, 3, and that generates a ton of fury, right? Or
right.
I guess you would go 1, 3, 2 in that situation, but it generates a ton of fury. And just swapping between them, I feel like you get a lot of stuff. But I don't know. There's something about like stack uptime that I'm not having the most fun with in Diablo. This is kind of what got me off of the Rend build that I was doing. That and the dumbest thing ever, but which is that I just let guys bleed out all the time, and then I would have to run back and get the gold that they dropped, which was like the least fun thing of my entire life. What I wanted to be able to do, because one of the things that's nice about the bleed build is you slow everyone by 30%, right? So what I was used to doing was walking into these groups, having them hit me and take bleed, so they all the thorns give them bleed, now they're bleeding, they're slowed by 30%, and then I slash for a rend, and I can see on their bars, right, that all of them are gonna bleed
Bleed
out,
out.
and I want to just walk away, right? I just want to leave. I know they're all gonna fucking die, right? But in the reality, what actually has to happen is I have to walk back and I have to pick up all of their gold or whatever. And then the other thing that's sucked about that is I kept failing fucking like events and shit because I wasn't killing stuff fast enough.
Yeah,
Like
that has been a problem for me
you
as well. Right, like I
yeah, when
survive,
you
but it takes a little bit longer, so you don't proc the mastery.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like it's kind of inefficient to deal damage to a target that is already going to bleed out from the dot that you have put on them, which sort of intuitively feels bad, but I need to kill stuff quickly in order to spawn new stuff in order to complete the event faster or whatever. And it's like that combination of things just kind of became mildly frustrating. And so when I got a good hammer, I was like, you know what, bash build it is. Let's go. Like I'm out.
I'm surprised you weren't using the skill in the same tier as Death Blow that like basically rips the bleed off of them.
Oh no, I was. That's Rupture.
Okay.
I was using Rupture quite a lot, but Rupture is one target.
Oh,
So the thing
okay.
that would typically happen is I'm up against an elite or something. I um basically just flaying. I'm hitting guys with rend, but then when the elite would get vulnerable, I was also using shouts at that time as well because of some other stuff. When the elite would get vulnerable, I would damage shout whatever, like, and then rend the elite, and it would be its whole health bar because the damage increase you would get was huge. And rend on a vulnerable target both elongates the vulnerability, and vulnerable targets take more damage from bleed, right? It was like this whole thing. So the moment I procted a vulnerability on that guy, I would just like rend the shit out of him with this commanding shout, basically. And then you rupture that guy and you one shot him because your whole bleed just
Right.
immediately, you just immediately do the whole bleed. That was actually pretty satisfying, all things considered. But it's like, you're not running into elites all the time or whatever. And just the little stuff was bothersome, I guess.
No, I
Um,
totally get that. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I'm kind of looking forward to like the like for me, Diablo's always like it's like the real game starts at the end game type of stuff, right?
sure.
Like, and I'm looking forward to getting in that area so I can like kind of like focus to build and like work on that kind of stuff. Some things that I learned along the way, like I have been ripping legendary affixes off and re-imprinting them, but you can only do that once. I didn't realize that you couldn't rip an imprint. Like if you imprint a weapon, you can't rip it back off, um, which is upsetting or disappointing.
Wait. So you only can do it once. Like,
The codex ones, I think you can do whenever, but the like if you're just pulling it off of a weapon, you can only put that back on once. You can't re-rip it back off. I found that out the hard way.
and then once you put it back on once, you can't put it back. Like, let's say I get a new weapon, I can't put it on the new weapon as
No,
well. Wow,
yeah, yeah. Um,
that does suck.
yeah. So something that I have turned on like the advanced tooltips, and like there are different qualities, right? Like this is like, you know, um, there's like a kind of like Pareto principle thing here, where like, 80% of what you want is to have the affix, but like once you kind of like hit those upper echelons of power, right? Like so that passage I was telling you about, that like makes an ancient summon if you use like the associated ability, right? That has a range, I think, base from like I think it's like 35 to 50. I have one that's at 41, but if you put it on a two-handed weapon, it doubles, so it's like 82% of summoning the guy, right? So I already re-imprinted that. I will not get to bring it to my next weapon. But if I find that weapon again, it potentially comes with like a higher percentage, right? Like if I want that to be my build, then I will be hunting for the 50% version so I can put it on my two-handed weapon, and every time I do it, I will summon the ancient as opposed to a good chance of it happening type of deal.
Okay, all right, that is interesting. That is not what I expected, but I get it. And so the codex ones are the ones you get out of dungeons, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
I've
cool.
not imprinted from a codex, so I don't know the details around that, but
Yeah. I
um
have done a bunch of dungeons because mostly just because when I run over them, I have hit them. But in general, my expectation is when I do my second character, I want to level that character entirely through side quests, entirely through dungeons, entirely through renown, or whatever else, just to sort of see what that is going to end up being like. And so I don't know. I'm pretty excited for
th-
that piece of things to kind of like.
that is a thing. You should be like I have been doing enough side quests that I've gotten level 2 in I got level 2 in Kovashad, level 2 in Kel but Kel Batter, whatever the third area is. I only got level 1 in the other one. But the first level gives you a skill point, and the second level gives you an extra
Yeah, the
potion.
potion. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got it in Kyovashad. I got level 2 in Kyovashad, I think because I
Okay.
did that stronghold. Strongholds are like a
Okay.
million. And also I think I did all the dungeons in Kyovashad.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. I did a bunch of side quests, so that's what got me to
Yeah.
level 2. Um, yeah. So that's huge, right? Like that's like and that's like universal for all your characters, right? Like there are so many so I think this is kind of like the thing that they realized they needed to go back and like redo improve from Diablo 3, right? One of the big problems with Diablo 3 to me, at least, and I think this is widely held belief, is that like sets were too powerful, right?
Yeah.
Like you basically got your set and that was like in terms of that like log distribution I was telling you about, that was
Mhm.
like way too much of that power curve, and there was way too little worth it afterwards, and like way too little before it, and so you got your set, and that was basically it. This is like 1,000 little things to tweak, right? Like, oh, I can get a little bit more power by like doing these renowns, or I can find all these altars of Lilith. Now, the thing that's going to be interesting about that is that that's all finite, right? Like at some point, I will find all of the altars of Lilith. I will clear all of the dungeons. I will get all of my areas to max rank, right? I can already see from the map that there's like a southern part that like I assume in like a year or two they'll release an expansion where you can go further down the continent or whatever and you can unlock more stuff. But it remains to be seen, to me at least, how long that tail is, right? Because that's I think where the meat is, right? Is like how much of it is it just like hoping for like better legendary drops, and how much of it is it like stuff that you can kind of work towards, right? That was one thing that I think they did well in later D3 was the mythic gems or whatever they were that you could
Yeah,
constantly level up.
the greater rifts or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was the basic for mythic
yeah,
keystones.
yeah, yeah. The thing like and I know that there are some things kind of in that vein towards the end, but like the gems part of that was the thing that, very concretely, even if you didn't get a good drop out of the run, you got levels on your gem, right? And that wasn't the super most satisfying thing, but it was at least a thing to work towards, right? It was like an incremental power increase.
Yeah.
Um, and so it remains to be seen, I guess, because we're not there yet. How well that goes, how long that tails, because I think that's going to be where like, what's the where the rubber meets the road, right? Like there's definitely enough normal game here for normal people to put in a normal amount of time and be satisfied with the game.
Yeah.
But like for the grind fiends, will there be enough grind that's satisfying enough, right?
No, I think you're absolutely right. This is one of the big questions in my mind about Diablo 4 because I feel like, something I saw the other day, somebody was talking about not every game has to be games as a service, and you can play a Tears of the Kingdom, or you can
Right.
make a Tears of the Kingdom, and it's a good, solid single player experience, and that's worth it, right? And I actually sort of disagree with this take, partially because of where I live in kind of the industry. Like in my mind, I think those sorts of single player experiences have kind of been co-opted by indies, right? You have sort of created there's kind of a gulf that's been created between shall we say the era of like Mass Effect and the era of now, where your single player game kind of can't be a Mass Effect anymore. You need to be bigger. Your map needs to be more. You need to have more content, right? And I don't think that you can release something on the scale of Mass Effect, right? A good straightforward story, but it's a $60 experience for a 20-hour game, shall we say, right? A 20-hour RPG. I just kind of feel like that doesn't fly, right? You need Elden Ring, which has a map that is, how many orders of magnitude bigger than something like the Fallout 3 map, for instance, right? That requires a lot more content, right? A lot more dev time. You need to pay devs for more years to just sort of fill that map with cool, interesting stuff for players to do. And in order to justify that cost, people it gets turned into a games as a service, right? Which is sort of everything becomes an MMO, right? Um, I feel like Diablo is this Diablo 4 is the poster child of that. I can see the writing on the wall that they have put so much time and effort into the content. One of the crazy things to me about Diablo 4, to be honest with you, is how closely it adheres to what I played at BlizzCon 2019, 4 years ago, right? Basically, all of these systems are the exact same of the systems that I played in that demo, right? Which kind of to me it kind of speaks to like the inverse of something like Anthem, right? Anthem was a game, it struggled to find its footing. They iterated on it, iterated on it, iterated on it, and when they finally kind of committed to sort of a vision for the game, which was Diablo or Destiny 2, but flying, they had 15 months to ship that game. Diablo 4, evidently, they committed to that vision 5 years ago, right? Or whenever it is they started like making that demo, right? Like it's just really honestly insane to me that the game is so unchanged from what I played back then. Um but you know, you can see that yeah, it takes 4 years to make this much content for kind of a game. And so whether or not Diablo transitions into that games as a service model where I'm incentivized to come back and do battle passes, right? I think is going to be sort of the big question. That said, I think they probably have a good formula for it, right? Like you if Diablo 4 has let's call it a 6-month battle pass, and it kind of does this Destiny 2 model. 6 months is a long time, maybe 4 months,
Yeah,
right?
I would say I
You,
think the Destiny ones are like 3 months.
you have a 4 month, you have a 4 month $20 battle pass, and the battle pass includes a new class or a new region or something kind of along these sorts of lines that is like not like a WoW expansion level of more content. I don't think that's in the cards, right? I don't think that's what
Yeah,
that's
no,
what they're looking to do.
to your
Um,
point, like the Destiny one is like, the battle pass won't like the battle pass will have stuff on it that you can't get, but like the region will be for everyone, right? Like
yeah, yeah.
um
And so that's what I was kind of envisioning. And I could see myself play, you know, like I could see myself, right? Um, I don't know. So yeah, especially because like seasonal content is just so built into Diablo.
yeah.
Like leveling up a new character from scratch, having a seasonal hero, seasonal affix kind of thing. I was doing that in Diablo 3, right? You know, honestly, to be honest, something that I sort of wanted to do playing Diablo 4 was go back and play Diablo 3. It was making me sort of like weirdly nostalgic for stuff in Diablo 3. Because well, the one thing that I think the class design is good, at least you know, for what I've played in the Barbarian, but I do sort of miss the raw potential and variety of sort of the different abilities and like the different runes. You have way fewer passives to work with. And so you have fewer like weird jank to pull out, if that makes sense. But the
Yeah.
weird jank was kind of what made runes fun in 3.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think part of it is going to be that I am hoping that the legendary affixes will have a lot more of that oomph in it. And we just
Yeah.
haven't seen a ton of them yet. Um, plus, those are ones that are like you can easily add them like down the line, right? Like, we could get like a version of the cube from Diablo 3 where you can just like kind of like freeform attach affixes if you want for a couple of them, that kind of thing. Um, I don't know if like I kind of agree with your overall point, right? Like I think Tears of the Kingdom is great, and Tears of the Kingdom has clearly, you know, like to your point about like that games have to be this game as a service. Tears of the Kingdom is not a game as a service, and it's selling gangbusters. But maybe that's just a thing that Nintendo can do now. Um, I guess like
Yeah.
God of War and God of War Ragnarok didn't really aren't really games as a service. They're big prestige games, and they're selling for a premium price.
And I would
But
also say that those are all party. Starfield would be another good example,
okay,
right? Really the only one that's independent, like platform independent, I think, are like Elden Ring, Dark Souls related stuff, and
yeah.
you know, like the Jedi Survivor, but that's kind of in the same sort of like vein. But the Jedi Survivor, like these are kind of the only like big single player experiences that I think kind of tap into that. And then I think that there are a lot of flops, right? Prey is a really good example. Do you know about Arcane and Prey and
Yeah, because
Redfall?
because Prey was supposed to like Prey is supposed to be very good, but my understanding is it wasn't like the most commercially successful thing. And then
Yeah.
Redfall's a disaster, but like that's
Yeah, and this is sort of emblematic of what I'm explaining, right? Which is
okay.
that you know, they made Arcane makes Dishonored, they make Dishonored 2. Both really good games, right? I bought Dishonored 2 on launch. I never even touched it, right? I to be honest, I think at the time we were doing the podcast and I said I am going to play this game. But mostly what I want to do is I want to encourage companies to know that these kinds of experiences are important to me. I guess I'm kind of a liar because I just never ever like went into it. So you have this studio. They're really renowned. Everybody loved Dishonored. It came from this era that I'm talking about, right? I think Dishonored was 2012 or something like that, right? 2011, 2012. We played that in college. So it would have been right around Mass Effect 2, Fallout New Vegas, Skyrim would have been sort of where Dishonored comes out. And then they make Prey. Prey is 2016, I want to say. Rave reviews, right? Basically one of the kind of foundational immersive sims, kind of in the idea of like Deus Ex or whatever else. But it just kind of doesn't go anywhere, and so the studio has to pivot to Redfall, right? Which is built from the ground up to be this sort of like weird janky games as a service. And to be honest, nobody wanted to make that game, right? Jason Schreier just put out an article where he talked about how they churned 80% of their studio because just nobody fucking wanted to work on this kind of bullshit title. And you know, that's kind of like the result of where we're at. And I feel like the opposite end of this, by the way, is that indies are filling the kind of content gap, right? Because when you opt for a $20 experience that'll give you 20 solid hours of play, but it is a smaller title, you're doing an indie because indie games can support that thing and they don't have the price tag, right? You know, something I've talked about before on the podcast is the nature of indie games is base hits, it's not home runs, right? Most indie games that are successful are not successful because they're Undertale, they're successful because they're Cardboard Kings, right? Which it's a reasonable, you know, it's a reasonable game developed by two guys for a couple $100,000 compared to tens of millions of dollars, right? And it does not have to sell a bazillion copies in order to make money. It has to sell, you know, however many copies, right? 50,000 copies, let's say. And I feel like that's kind of the bind that you're in if you are someone who wants to make a Mass Effect single player title, or you know, I don't know, you have to kind of figure out how to get that in between those two spots. And I think if you're Nintendo, if you're Sony, if you're Microsoft, you can just bankroll this shit because you have a gazillion dollars and you're trying to sell consoles, right? Part of what sells God of War Ragnarok is that it sells PS5s, and so Sony kind of doesn't care.
I mean
You know,
that's like like I think the Switch is profitable, but like for years and years and years and years, the Xbox and the PlayStation have not been profitable machines. They make it all in soft, like they are loss leaders for the software.
Oh, I see what you're saying because the Xbox, it's right. But if you're Microsoft, you're looking to put Xboxes in people's homes, right?
Oh,
And so having Starfield is the thing that does that. Does that make
I see
sense?
what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you're mostly right. Or I think I get what you're saying, and I think that like the first parties are willing to take the risk because I mean maybe Nintendo wouldn't, but like Nintendo's games are always good and they always sell like gangbusters, right? Like, but like if Xbox is not profitable, then you know Microsoft shuffles it around in a division inside of itself, and it doesn't matter. Whereas like Arcane can't afford to do that. Although I guess Arcane must be owned by Microsoft now because they were owned by Bethesda, and they got acquired. So maybe I guess Microsoft decided to make them make Redfall, and that was a bad idea. But you know,
Yeah, maybe. Well, maybe Microsoft. I would imagine actually Microsoft just sort of inherited Fall, right?
I'm
bet
not
it
sure
was.
what happened, but
Yeah,
that would
me
make
neither.
sense.
But I think that's actually kind of part of what I like. For instance, Square Enix is the real people getting crunched are third party publishers, third party AAA publishers, right? Square Enix, Ubisoft, EA,
EA,
right?
Actibliss,
Bethesda would have been a good, yeah, and then Activision Blizzard. But the thing is, those guys are now. How many times have you seen people be like, Sony should buy Square Enix?
yeah,
And it's
and
because
Microsoft is trying to buy Activision Blizzard,
and
right?
yeah, Microsoft bought Bethesda and they're trying to buy Activision Blizzard. And it's just like I feel like that's kind of the crunch that is the overall, you know, if I'm talking about like the market like of video games as a whole, the squeeze is being put to publishers like that, right? You can't make if you're Square Enix, it is very hard, I feel like, to survive without Final Fantasy 14, right? Not that I'm
So
giving away.
this is a thing that I know a little bit about, and I can maybe talk about it without putting
Sure.
you at risk, because I follow people who care about this kind of stuff. Is like I know that like Square Enix historically had like basically 14 keeps them afloat, and like I might be confusing them with Capcom because I know Capcom's in like a similar position. They're another big kind of like third party AAA publisher. Is like they need things to sell like ludicrous amounts to be considered successful, right? Because they have to put so much money into it, and they don't have like these side businesses propping them, or not side business. Like Xbox is a side business, right? Like PlayStation is a little bit less of a side business for Sony, but like Sony manufactures like other hardware, right?
Yeah, like they're selling TVs. Do you know
Right,
what I mean? Like you can sort of you can write down some of the losses if a generation of PlayStation doesn't do well, right?
right. Or if any
You can't do
particular
that if you're
game
Square
doesn't
Enix.
do well, right? Like
Yeah.
you can afford like as much as like we talk about like AAA games being relatively safe. I think that's mostly true of like your Ubisofts and these third party AAAs, right? Like, and I think it's also somewhat true of the console manufacturers, but like it's less true for Microsoft and Sony because they can afford to take a risk on something that's a little bit weird because they can, because Microsoft Office 365 sells 10 billion subscriptions a year, right? Like, um,
Do you know the Microsoft Office tweet? The one that's like, Microsoft Office is like the most successful piece of hardware of all time, just because they force you to pay. They force you to pay for it. It's like, do you want to move an image around? Fuck you. Like, do you want to? Do you want to just change the formatting of your whole document? Eat shit. Now pay me $150, bitch.
that's so the crazy thing. I saw a headline that's like, Microsoft might pull out of the UK over this Activision deal, which like you know what that means? That means that fucking Microsoft is telling the United Kingdom, you don't want us to acquire Activision Blizzard. Fuck you! You don't get Microsoft word, right? Like,
no, that was when I saw that news. I was flabbergasted because like this is so far off Diablo 4. Who cares?
who cares?
It's just like imagine getting bullied by a company, right? Like this is like megacorp shit from like a cyberpunk game.
Right.
You know what I mean? You have this gigantic multinational organization, like multinational corporation, that is going to bully your country because you are going to upend the entire infrastructure of their economy. And it's like, and you know what I mean? It's like it's not even like the United Kingdom has like they got destroyed by Brexit, right? A 10% decrease in their like overall, or how many years has it been since Brexit? 7 years. They've decreased their GDP 10% since Brexit. They have this disastrous future because of inflation, and now you're getting fucking pushed around the schoolyard by Microsoft. It's just like, I'm so sorry, but also you brought this on yourselves. Yeah, that's crazy to me.
Yeah, no, I was waiting at some point for some like I. It's funny because I predicted this one in a different way. Like I was waiting for a company to just like say no to like some regulation and like try and fucking stop us, right? Like obviously it's harder to do when like because like most large software companies don't have like a standing like PMCs or like the equivalent that would like make that enforcement work, and like none of the defense contractors are big enough to like make that work. But like like but this is the thing, right? Like you could say like, hey Orion, how's it going?
How's it going, little boy? How you doing?
You could like say, right, like California, fuck your privacy laws, right? And then like people will still get it, right? Like this already happens, right? Saudi Arabia bans like some percentage of video games because they decide it's like not halal, right? And they get that software. Like I know that Pakistan, it's Pakistan, has like a really big Tekken scene that was like unknown up until like 2 years ago when like a couple of Pakistani players managed to make it out to a major and just like fucking wiped the floor with everyone. Like, what the fuck happened? It's like literally people going on the Hajj go buy video games and bring them back to Pakistan, right? Like, and like obviously the United Kingdom's slightly differently positioned, right? But like Microsoft like pulls out of the UK, right? Like, I'm sure the people who need Word will be able to get Word, or if they don't, they'll move to like some other piece of software, right? But like the UK is like not a big enough market to like like is the value of business in the UK worth more than acquiring Activision Blizzard, which is, I guess, the question that uh that the people are asking. Lou in the chat says, open source, baby. I will tell you, I have used OpenOffice. I used OpenOffice for a long time. I used LibreOffice for a long time. They are not as good, unfortunately. I honestly, and also they're not productionalized enough to work in a corporate environment. They work for individuals, but I don't think they work for companies. I said Google Docs, so I should probably disclose I work for Google, but I feel like those cloud-based solutions are probably the thing that happens, right? Like,
Yeah.
like G Suite's a thing already, so I'm sure that a lot of companies will be able to like move to that kind of thing. But anyway, Diablo.
That is so far off of Diablo. So I don't even remember, how do we even get off on this tangent?
Because
I
we
don't know. We were just
we were talking about the AAA sales model.
Right. Yes. Okay. So yeah. So to me, the question for the longevity of Diablo 4 is, can it bridge that gap? Right? Can it become the sort of long tail games? Especially because I think one of the things about Blizzard that was interesting is that for this huge company like this game studio, they don't actually have, compared to something like Ubisoft, for instance, right? They don't actually have the same pedigree of games, right? They don't put out multiple games a year, right? They tend to put out a smaller number of titles, which are, like much more focused and built for this sort of games as a service model, right? Overwatch does not release as a $60 bespoke, single player experience. It releases as a multiplayer shooter that has a long tail, essentially a games as a service model. And basically every game that they have done is sort of built with that in mind. There's like I just don't think there's ever really been a quote unquote single player Blizzard game for like 20 years, maybe going all the way back to Diablo. Even Diablo 2 had sort of like the multiplayer that had its whole economy. Is kind of like a proto MMO in a lot of ways. But do you see what I'm saying? And so my thing is, can Diablo 4 make the jump and kind of get into this class of, okay, here are sort of our bespoke, long tail games that are going to have a dedicated community to them, that even years on, people are going to be playing Diablo 4 in the same way they play Hearthstone, WoW,
I mean,
Overwatch, whatever.
and the important part of that is playing in such a way such that they will continue to feed money to the beast, right? Like,
Yeah, true. For instance, StarCraft 2, it was like this. They just couldn't figure out how to make money off of it, right? Weirdly, StarCraft 2 still has a player base that I am surprised is like can keep that game sort of afloat, right? One of the things I was talking about was just going back and playing StarCraft 2. And it's not like like with something like Paladins or whatever, right? You're getting dead lobbies, right? You're not even able to complete matchmaking because the game is so dead, right? But I can go back to StarCraft 2, which hasn't had new content in like 4 years, and the game is still healthy enough that I can find games at varying skill levels kind of without any issue whatsoever. Problem with StarCraft 2 is they couldn't figure out how to monetize it, right? They couldn't figure out how to make money off that game. Just because it wasn't built in a world where you could make you know you could make money off of it in the same way that you could make money off of something like WoW, right? And so I think that's going to be that's my pitch for the interesting question about Diablo.
yeah, no, I mean, there's a thing there too, though, right? Like, there is no inherent reason why StarCraft 2 needs to like keep making money, right? Like, it doesn't need content updates, right? Like StarCraft 1 got Brood War and a couple patches, right? Like, and I'm sure there's still people playing that because people will play that game until like, the earth burn, until the sun explodes. But it just, for Blizzard, it's just keeping the servers up, which, I don't know. I don't know how much that costs them, but like, it's not, I don't think it's terrible. Um, but like, but like, I'm actually curious, right? Like, I wonder if StarCraft 2 is viewed by Blizzard as a success, right? Like, maybe it's not as successful as it could have been, but like, did it make its money back? I'm sure it did. It sold a ton of copies, right? Like the fact that they
Yep.
couldn't continue to monetize doesn't make it a failure. It just makes it like, um, not a long tail product. And I think Diablo could probably like Diablo 3, right? Like similar situation, right? Like no, not a lot of continuing monetization, if any at all, right? Like they dropped Necromancer as like a DLC pack, and I think that's basically it.
Yeah, they
Um,
had Reaper of Souls, they did Necromancer, and that was basically it. They had plans for another expansion that got scrapped in favor of Diablo 4. Was
yeah,
reporting from Jason Schreier.
that makes sense to me. And I think there's like, but like if Diablo 4 doesn't hang on and they just drop the battle passes, will it be a failure if they sell enough copies? And or like, to what degree of a failure will it be, or what degree of a success, right? Like, um, World of Warcraft has had an extremely long tail. I wonder how they evaluate each expansion, right? Like, um, I don't know. Obviously enough that like Microsoft wants to buy them, but like they're also buying them as part of like the Call of Duty juggernaut, right? Like the Activision juggernaut. But I don't know.
Yeah. An interesting thing that I am excited to see is an expansion for classes. I think one of the things that is the biggest win for me in Diablo 4 is the class fantasy. If less like the overall class design, I could probably quibble with a bunch of stuff, right? We've talked about builds that work, builds that don't kind of thing. Um but I think Barbarian, for instance, does a really good job of making you not just feel like a barbarian and like evoke that kind of gameplay, but do so in interesting and unique ways that aren't like pulling from other sorts of like tried and true versions of things, right? The fact that as a barbarian you have 3 weapons equipped and you're swapping between them, that's really interesting and unique, right? I don't know that I've ever seen another RPG do something kind of along these sorts of lines. And I think to me, this is like one of the selling points of Diablo 4 is it is innovative in the way that it approached class design, at least for this one class that I've played. And that gives me a lot of hope that, as they think about other classes, right? Bringing back classes from other versions of the game, right? Amazon, Witch Doctor, Wizard, what a monk. Wow, I guess most of the classes from
I would
Demon
say like
Hunter.
which doctor is like a yeah. I don't know if which doctor comes back because it's kind of like shares a space with Necromancer. It's like the summons thing.
Yeah, I
I
mean they
think they're
should
absolutely going to do
in
like either a paladin or a crusader type, right? Like something
yeah.
in that vein. Like but before I saw the first end of the first act boss, I had assumed that that thing about the armor was a tease for like upcoming, like an upcoming character class.
Yeah, and they're very clearly going for this thing of like, boy, Lilith is a demon. She's the daughter of Mephisto. She's real bad, but also the angel who like against her is also
But
bad,
Angel
right?
also bad.
Yeah, exactly. And to be fair, I think that this is fertile design for the world and story of Diablo. This is one of the things that I think actually worked great about Diablo 3. People are mad about that story, but I think they're fucking losers. Diablo 3 had a really good story, and one of the things that made that story so good is the conflict between Tyrael and Imperius, right? Where Imperius is like, yeah, I don't give a fuck. I'll burn the shit out of Sanctuary in order to kill the primevals, right? Like eat my ass kind of thing. And that feeling definitely comes across with Inarius and the Church of the Cathedral of Light in here, especially because like in act 2 there's all this conflict between kind of like the homegrown druids who are like built from the ground up, right, to protect Skosglen from evil or whatever, and the introduction of these knights penitent and the cathedral to like keep these people safe or whatever. Like I think all of that stuff is just like it's good friction. It's really really fertile storytelling, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I would, from like a completely neutral standpoint, I think I would agree with you. Like if I like, but like in the context of like me having seen, like this is like kind of like we talked about with Fast and Furious feels sincere, right? Like, but Angel bad feels like enough of a trope that like I'm kind of half rolling my eyes at it, right? I don't care that much because it's Diablo, right? Like, the story is secondary to me hitting things and getting shinies. Um, but The kind of like I just rolled my eyes. Also, I think so. Um, Again, spoiler warning. At the end of the first act, it is strongly implied that Anarius killed Rathma. I think the thing is going to turn out that he didn't because, like, we didn't see him kill him, and that just seems like a classic twist, right? Like, turns out someone else killed Rathma, and Anarius is being weird somewhere. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, in general, I kind of feel like we're going for sort of like lawful, uh evil, lawful neutral kind of thing where the Cathedral of Light, it's not that the Cathedral of Light is bad because, obviously demonstrably so far it hasn't been. Donan, who is a good guy, is a member of the Cathedral of Light, and he is legitimately trying his best by bringing the Cathedral of Light to Scotland, right? But I just imagine that somewhere down the line we're gonna be fighting these Knights Penitent rather than whatever, and that's going to be part of like the enemy structure, right? So
Yeah, well, we'll see. As I mean, it's also kind of like everything shit, right? Like everything is shit.
yeah.
Like this is like grim darkness type stuff, right? Like the Cathedral of Light is okay, but like so that there is a quest in. I know you haven't done a side quest, and basically, um, there's a side quest where like people get possessed, and this one member of the church is exorcising people. But you find out through the course of the quest that like standard church practice now is just to burn people who are possessed, right? And this woman is willing to do the things she needs to do to like exorcise people. And so like it's kind of that like everything is terrible, but there are small glimmers of hope inside, right? This is why, like I said, like 7 or 8 out of 10 times it's the worst version of things, but like 2 or 3 at times you get like a little hopeful sliver, right? Like you find like, the person's not dead and you rescue them, right? Like which is I think kind of like the kind of whole undercurrent, right? Is like you live for the little things, you try your best, right? Like um
Yeah, it's interesting to me that this is grim darkness, but it's grim darkness in a different vein from what I would expect. Like Warhammer would be the good counterexample of another version of grim dark, but that is a different version, right? One of the things about Warhammer is you're constantly sort of like tempted by chaos, right? And like the power that is offered to you by the chaos gods. Um, but like there's this thing, the core of Diablo being you're just little ants, in between this war between two gargantuan, titans, right? That's like and especially all of there's just some way the aesthetic of Diablo with kind of these like run down churches and cathedrals or whatever, um that speaks to me on a different level, which I think is actually kind of interesting. One of the things about Grimdark that everybody complains about is they always say Grimdark, it's just like, oh, it's just like this one thing. But I actually think Diablo and Warhammer are two very different sort of slices of Grimdark. In the same way that you can have kind of contrasting versions of sort of noble stories, right? I don't know, and I think that's neat. I am on board for it, and I like it quite a lot. But again, I also liked it in Diablo 3. People hated it in Diablo 3. I would argue they're wrong, but whatever.
yeah, I mean, we'll see how the story goes too. Like part of this too is also like it feels weird because it occurs to me like as I'm playing and now is that like you know it's kind of implied that like everything's shit right now, but it wasn't always that shit, right? Like that there were good times at some point. You just are always in the action when things are the worst, like the worst. At a local minima, I guess is the right way to put it. Um, so it'll be interesting to see. I'm actually interested in seeing how the story plays out. It's interesting, and I find the lore. I do find the lore fascinating, right? Like Anarius fucked Lilith, and they made Sanctuary, and both of them can't go home, and they're really pissed about it. So,
Mommy and daddy are fighting.
yeah, right. I mean, they keep calling Lilith mom, right? Like that's like a thing. Mother, and then father Anarius, right? Like which is like literally true in some ways. Um, so we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, it's funny. It makes me want to learn more about Diablo, which I do know a reasonable amount about. Um, but like I know that they made a book. They have like the Book of Cain or whatever, which like explains all of the lore. I never read that, but I'm like, Maybe I'm gonna go read the Book of Cain.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm interested in seeing actually is how sort of the primevals filter into things, because like I said, we're only at Act 2. But I feel like the headline of Diablo is always going to be Diablo, right? Um, or Asmodan or Mephisto, right? And I guess like maybe Lilith is enough to sort of like carry things on her own. She's obviously been enough so far. But how much longer can we live in a world of Diablo without touching on Tyrael, Diablo, Imperius, right? Some of the characters who have been sort of I don't know, defined over the years.
Yeah. So you wouldn't know this because you don't set the titles by it. But I titled this stream Diablo. This time it's a woman. Because like my kind of like top level impression of this game from the beta was like, you know that meme that's like drone striking civilians in like the Middle East, and it's like they say next time they'll be sent by a woman. It's like how inspiring, right? Like it's like that's like so like that's kind of like my feeling about this. It's like yes, you know, Diablo this time, but you know, it's the thing I am afraid of, and I don't think they're going to do it, is they're somehow going to make it so like Lilith was actually right. Like, you know, Lilith did nothing wrong, which I don't think they're going to do because like she is way too evil for like that to be the thing. But like,
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I think they're going with like everything sucks because like Anarius is also not great, but it's not like Lilith is. There will be people on the internet that will say Lilith did nothing wrong. In the same way that people say Thanos did nothing wrong. Like people who like fundamentally misunderstand that like vaguely sympathetic portrayals of people doesn't mean that like, you know, they're absolutely correct. That means that they have like, you know, they're just not always wrong.
No, I did see a take like this, and it made me like, "Hmm?" God, hold on. God. So far in Diablo, Lilith just seems like a good, in parentheses, powerful, angry, protective mom, and Anaria seems like a giant tool. I strongly suspect this story is more heaven and hell are both what we make of them, though hell is a bit worse than Gur angry righteous fight against evil, which I agree with that second part. That's fair enough. But the first part, I was like, oh my god, like
Yeah.
holy shit.
Yeah, no, I mean like they make it pretty clear from like moment one that like bad news, right? Like that opening scene kind of sets the stakes as like things are not great, right? Like but yeah.
Yeah, I like the opening scene quite a lot.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I thought it was fun. It was one of those things where I was like, "Oh no, I know exactly where this is going." When they like offer you that drink or whatever. Do you have to replay that opening every time you started
Yes.
a character?
Or
Do you know?
so I haven't played a second character, but like I've played it for 1, 2, 3. I played it 4 times now because I played it 2 times in the first beta, 1 time in the second beta, and Lou in the chat says yes. My God, yes.
Oh my
I have
god,
skipped
I
them. Like
really
you
hate
can
that.
skip most. You can skip most of the dialogue, right? Like it's not a huge deal. The thing that aggravates me the most about that is having to walk back to get the waypoint, and not being able, like, you know, you have to like get the waypoint in Kyovashad before you can walk back and get the waypoint in that starting town. Although my hope is that those waypoints, once you get to that first town, are all unlocked for all your characters. So that will probably be less a pain in the ass. Obviously, between the betas, everything resets, so you couldn't carry that forward. But
You know, fair enough. Anyway, I guess that's it. I'm gonna be playing a lot of Diablo. We sort of ate up all of our time talking about this.
yeah,
But you have 10, you know, what else have you been doing this week?
2 weeks since we took
Oh my
Memorial Day.
god, true. Yeah, Memorial Day off
Um,
unexpectedly.
so things that I did that are worth mentioning. Um, I built a planter out of wood in real life. I learned some lessons about that, but I doubt that anybody here cares about that.
Measure twice, cut once, mango. That's what they say.
Yeah, no. So the valuable lesson I learned is to not screw boards into end grain because like I screw like I have these like 4x4s that are the corner posts, and the first way I did it is I made them short and I put 2x6s on top of them. I'm just going to build the superstructure on top of that, and the 2x6s on top of the 4 short posts immediately tore out. So now I just made the 4x4s tall, and I just screwed the board straight into the corners, and so I lost a little bit of interior space, but it's fine. It works. It's super fucking heavy. I could probably kill someone with it if I dropped it on them, but that was fun. But the more relevant news, very relevant, very good. I finished Three Body Problem by, I cannot pronounce the guy's name. It's like Shikshin Liu or something like that. Very, very good. I highly recommend it. Very kind of cool, hard-ish science fiction that I would recommend to everybody. It opens with the Cultural Revolution in China, and like the one of the main characters' fathers getting like literally Mao Mao'd and like beaten to death. So yeah, and it's got like really cool science fiction stuff in it too. So I'd highly recommend that. I don't want to spoil too much of it. But I would highly recommend it. The other big thing is, like I was saying earlier, I played a bunch of Street Fighter 6. Street Fighter 6 is fucking great. I played a little bit of the World Tour, which people are saying is good single player content. If you want to try it at some point, buddy, modern controls mean that you don't have to like learn all of the hard combos, right? Like, and apparently it's like viable, right? Like it is not, like it's going to be tournament legal, and like there is active discussion about if modern controls are going to take too much away from you for you to be practically viable in a tournament. And it seems like the answer is it will be. So, and not that you care about that level of it, but like it being viable in the pro scene, meaning kind of like, in the same way that like, people care too much about the pro meta in like League, people care too much about the pro meta in Street Fighter, right? In fighting games, but like it being viable at that level means it'll filter down. But it's very good. I've been enjoying myself. The mechanics are super fun. I've been throwing people at Zangief, getting my spinning pile drivers off. I'm probably going to play that after this because otherwise I played Diablo today, and I want to get more sets in as my boy Zangief with his spinning pile drivers. But otherwise, I hit Diamond in Marvel Snap. That season ends tonight. Yeah. That's basically all the big things I've done. Buddy, how's your 2 weeks been?
Honestly, I've been playing a lot of Hearthstone, which I'm very proud of. Like all the WoW stuff is normal, but like Hearthstone, boy, I have maybe this is the best I've ever played in Hearthstone. So last season, Enraged Warrior popped off, right? But that was a deck I pulled from somewhere, right? Somebody on the competitive Hearthstone subreddit shared a desk list, and he was like, I actually kind of think Enraged Warrior is the nuts. Give it a shot. Turns out Enraged Warrior was the nuts. I was part of this wave of people who adopted that deck. It's now the top of tier 2. It's a really, really strong deck with really favorable matchups. People are looking to counter it more often, which is whatever. But the thing I wanted to do was I wanted to make another version of Enraged Warrior work, and a mini set came out, right? And in the mini set, there were a couple of cards that I was like, oh, I think this is perfect. So I have been playing Control Board. And Control Warrior has 2 cards in it that are really interesting and a lot of fun. Number 1 is Black Rock and Roll. It's a 5-mana spell that says every minion in your deck gains stats equal to its cost, right? And then there's Lorthamar Theron, which is a 7-mana 7/7, comes into play. He doubles the stats of all minions in your deck, right? Now, the ideal scenario is you Black Rock on 5, Lorthamar on 7, and just every minion you play from there is a fucking monster, right? But the amount that actually happens is honestly pretty rare, right? Like it's not a very common thing. But Black Rock and Roll is the perfect version of like a Control Warrior win condition, right? Where it's, hey, I'm going to survive the early turns. I'm going to do a bunch of setup. I'm going to kind of control the board or whatever. And then I'm going to turn my entire deck into these fucking insane bombs, right? And I'm just going to smack them onto the board again and again. And eventually you're going to stop being able to execute my 35-35, and it's going to hit you in the face for 35 fucking damage. I'm going to win, right? Even better, actually. In some versions of the deck, so in my version of the deck, there's a card called Trench Stalker, which when it comes into play, it attacks 3 random enemies. Trench Stalker is a 9-mana 8/9. So when you Black Rock and Roll it, it becomes a 17/8 18 in stats. When you Lorthamar that, it becomes a 34, 36 in stats. And so many of my games are just won because I black rock and roll and I draw a trench stalker and I just slam that thing and I hit the opponent in the face for whatever 16, 34 damage. And you just like win off of that. But there's a lot of other pieces of that puzzle that players have been playing around with, right? Most notable one is the Rift package. So the general idea for this is there is a card called Naga Giant. Naga Giant is a 20 mana 8/8, right? It's like any of these giants, but it is reduced in cost for every 1 mana of spell you cast, right? Um, and the Rift package is a group of 6 spells that when you empty your mana to play them, right? So if it's a 5 mana spell, you spend 5 mana, and then at the end of that you have 0 mana. It's called Finale. You replay the last Rift you played. And these are the package is pretty good. There's one that gives you 2 attack, but it's 1 mana. So it's the kind of thing where you use that to trigger the other rifts. There's another rift that draws a card, gives it +3/+3, draws a minion rather, gives it +3/+3. And then the best one is called Bridge Rift. It's a 5 mana. It summons a 3/4 with taunt, a 4/3 with rush. And generally what you want to do is you throw a Bridge Rift and then you finale one of the other rifts so that you do 1 mana gain 2/3/4s or 4/3s, right? You gain a bunch of stats on the board. That's a pretty big tempo swing. My expectation was that this package was bad for Black Rock and Roll for the simple reason of lets you run fewer minions, right? If you're dedicating 6 of your spell slots to these minions, you are or 6 of your deck slots to these minions, you are definitionally running less minions to benefit from the Black Rock and Roll. Even if Naga Giant gaining +20/+20 is pretty fucking funny. And I have won games by playing a 0 mana 28/28 and untapping with it and just going face for like a bazillion damage. That's really fun or whatever. So what I did was I cut a bunch of cards and I added the weapon package to that deck. The weapon package being a couple of weapons that allow you to control the early game, because one of the big weaknesses of that deck was kind of what do you do on turn 2, turn 3, right? The answer for me is you play Hook Fist, right? It's this pirate. When you attack with a weapon, you gain 4 armor, you draw a card, right? You basically get to cast Shield Block for free. That's pretty great. You play these weapons that allow you to pick off enemy aggressive minions to put chip damage on enemy control decks or whatever. And then the payoff is there's a new card that is a 7 mana 4/7 with lifesteal, and it reduces in cost for each time you play a weapon that game, right? And so basically this is my like replacement for Naga Giants, and I've made it all the way up to Diamond with this deck. It has a pretty nuts win rate. The win rate is like 66%. I think I've played 30 games of the deck. I'm 21-11 or something like that, and it's 32 games of the deck. And we're gonna see if I can ride this baby to legend. It would be the first. This would be like the pinnacle of being a Hearthstone player. I feel like if I can get to legend with an off meta deck that I built myself, that would be the greatest achievement I could possibly get. It's honestly funny how much value you gain over the course of a game because people don't know what to expect from your deck. They don't understand what your game plan is. Playing these weapons and then having people be like, "What the fuck are they doing?" Like who runs Abyssal Basis, right? Which is this demon that has like lifesteal or whatever. But the amount of times that's just like hard won me the game because I'm playing a huge Abyssal Basis. He has 11 attack. He's life steals all of the health I lost in the early game back, and it's just like that they don't have a way to deal with that. Is pretty is it's I don't know, it's pretty satisfying. I've had some incredible wins with it too, but I won't go into the details. We won't do a play by play because boy, this deck can absolutely scam games from people where it's just like I am going to lose and then I draw my trench stalker and it deals 16 to their face and oh never mind, I shouldn't have won that, but I totally did, right? One of the things about trench stalker that's funny is he attacks 3 enemies. So yesterday I was playing this, for instance, I was playing against a paladin. Paladin had me at like 4 life. Actually, that's not true. Paladin literally had me at 1 HP. Okay. Because I had barely survived. He had a full board of 7 minions. All of these minions are huge, right? And he was at, I just chipped him down with a bunch of weapon damage. He was at like 15 health or something like that. And I was like, okay, well, my out is to draw one Trench Stalker. It's 1 out of 15 cards. And then to have that Trench Stalker hit not 3 minions, but hit the opponent's face. And I played the Trench Stalker, and out of 8 targets it could have chose, it went straight for his face, which was very satisfying because it's like, yeah, I didn't deserve that win, but get wrecked, buddy. Like,
Pure skill.
yeah, exactly. I mean, to be fair, there aren't like it is a very skill testing deck because you have to know the limits of when you can. Black Rock and Roll is a terrible card for tempo, obviously, right? It is 5 mana, do nothing, right? Which is just like, and there are some times where I sit there and I go, I don't win this game unless I basically pass turn 5, right? But and there are times where I basically pass turn 5 and I just get run over because it's like, you know what, 5 mana do nothing is not good enough, and they fucking just owned me, right? That's fine. But boy, it's just it is so dumb to be able to, you know, pull to top deck something and just go hard face for like this insane amount of damage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds satisfying.
Actually, the most satisfying thing that has ever happened is I was playing against Beef Priest, who obviously should have won. He was I Black Rock and rolled. He did Lorthamar Theron twice. So he stole 2 of my Lorthamar Therons. And all of his deck was quadruple in stats. And he was playing the most massive fucking minions of all time, including a 32, like a 32 something Trench Stalker, and he 32'd me to the face. I took 32 damage to the dome. And then I drew my own Trench Stalker, which was a 34-36. And I hit him for 34 to kill him, which was probably the best win I've ever had with this deck.
Very cool.
Anyway, so yeah, that's what I've been up to.
In the chat, Lou says, nerf Kim and JP and Luke and Sim and Geef and Marissa and basically half the cast. Forgot DJ and Cammy. Lou, are you playing Street Fighter?
Are you playing Street Fighter 6? I know she's not playing. We talked about Diablo 4. She's not playing Diablo 4. Playing the opening every time is boring.
Yeah, I mean, that's watching from afar. Okay, I was like, are you like just playing like Ken and Ryu? Because that's like the only people that are on that list. Oh, DreamHack had a tournament. Okay, that makes sense. I guess, you know, Guile is the standard, like, oh, he's really scary, especially with modern controls, because like you can get at sonic booms easier. Because like part of the balance for Sonic Boom is that you have to hold back to charge and press forward, and so unlocking that and making it essentially like a Smash Brothers move, people are really scared of that. I am not good enough to be playing super high skill players, so I'm not super into it. Like I can't give a super opinion, super high level opinion, but I've been enjoying Geef. I get my throws. Report from the tournament. Punk and Leffen are feuding. Leffen's always kind of like Leffen, I believe, is kind of got like a heel personality. HMS is delight. That's it. That's all I've got. That's fine, right? Like everybody's gonna cheer for Ryu. They've already announced the first season of characters, which is like Akuma and Rashid and like 2 new characters. So I'm excited for all of it. I want to learn JP. Not a single Ryu in the top 8. Interesting. I have to believe that that's like people don't know the game yet, right? So there was a big controversy. People hacked the beta so they could keep playing after.
I heard about this.
And so there was like, basically, if they caught you, you were not allowed to enter a tournament for like the amount of time that you got, like that you had, like the amount of time from launch that you had been able to play the game. But like, I have to imagine that like the no Ryu in the top 8 is like people know how Ryu plays because he plays not the exact same, but like basically the same as he has played for like, 30 fucking years. And like these new characters are kind of like catching people off guards. Last match was Kim and Cammy, DJ Geef, Kim. Yeah, that sounds about right. I know Kim's supposed to be pretty powerful. Geef, look, I'm a Geef player. I love my grapplers, but historically, Geef will like do well super early on, and then people will figure out how to deal with him, and he will cease to be a threat, at least at high levels of play.
Do people ever talk about refinement in like the meta of games?
What do you mean?
So something that happens in Hearthstone that's pretty interesting is decks become solved, right? So for instance, on the new mini set release, people didn't really know what to do, but one deck picked up a card and was like, "Oh, I can use this to close games." 3 a 6 mana 3/4 weapon that gives you Wind Fury. And Paladin has some stuff that buffs their attack for cheap. And so basically they're using this Wind Fury weapon to dome you for 12, right? It's aggressive, get your chip damage in, and then this is now the big finisher to that deck. Is this like weapon, right? Whereas something like in Rage Warrior, that meta was the same for weeks and weeks and weeks, right? With basically no real changes. And it just took someone sitting down and kind of refining the Enraged Warrior deck list to realize, oh, there's actually a tier 1 deck, tier 2 deck maybe, right? That's been hiding underneath the meta for a long time, right? It just took someone a couple of weeks in order to figure out it was there, right? And so on one hand, you have decks that become solved very quickly. Pure Paladin is the version of this, right? Where it's like, oh, here's this weapon, it's a really good finisher. 2 or 3 days after the launch of the mini set, we have figured out that this is the way you add cards to the mini set and what it's going to do. And on the other end, you have decks that are hiding underneath the meta for a long time. Nobody has really figured them out until it kind of explodes from the back end. Does that kind of refinement ever happen in like FGC stuff, right?
Yes. So not in the same way, right? Like obviously there's not as much like with patches, the meta shifts around. But like people figure out like the tech on characters. This happens a little bit less in the modern era because like the information is more accessible, right? Like very famously, like Smash Brothers Melee, kind of like gets revolutionized by tech every once in a while that somebody figures out. Um, but things are a lot more, lot less opaque in kind of modern fighting games. So like the next few weeks will be people figuring out how to deal with different people's toolkits, what the good responses are, and then a big part of it is, of course, execution. Right, that's something that a card game doesn't have. Is like people getting better enough at execution, getting better at reactions, being able to hit like that's the big thing about fighting games, right? Is like at any time you can lose a round because you fuck up, right? Like you drop your combo, um, and like whether you go for like the theoretical max damage combo or you go for an easier to execute combo at the moment in the moment is like a big kind of thing, right? And so there are it happens, I think, at less of a scale than you're describing, right? It's not like there's some hidden piece of tech somewhere that somebody's like not going to find. At least not like again with modern games, right? Like those types of things historically happen with kind of like unintended interactions that kind of that like people discover and like use to their advantage. This is kind of like what you see with like speed running, right? Like how like you watch a summoning salt video and they'll be like, and then they dropped the minute because someone discovered like whoozy boozy tech, right? And like you jump backwards through a door and you like get launched into space or whatever, right? Like that type of thing used to happen. It doesn't happen so much anymore, and if it does, it kind of tends to get patched out just because like there's like there's a concern about like the competitiveness of the scene. Um, but there is kind of there is a long period of like figuring out how everything works, figuring out how things go together. It's just less dramatic and it's less accessible to your average gamer, right? Like I'm not going to be executing on a lot of the high level combos. I can barely execute some of the basic level combos. That's part of why I play grapplers, is they're not particularly combo heavy. Um, uh, but people who play very well will be figuring those things out. Uh, yeah, which is Lou says, which is why calls for nerfs on days one are hilarious. There's still so much to figure out. That is absolutely true. Um, yeah,
No, I mean that is the thing that happens in Hearthstone, right? Is you'll have essentially the solved decks. Um, People talk about the perfect 30, right? Like a 30 card deck list. So what happens when nerfs are too quick is it punishes the solved decks, right?
yeah.
When the reality is the meta just hasn't congealed enough because people have been experimenting with other decks. And once other decks start getting refined, what tends to happen is the solved decks just drop out from the meta completely because they get nerfed on day one, because they got solved on day one. And once other decks start getting solved and we understand what the perfect 30 becomes, those things just like absolutely dumpster them. And it's a pretty bad phenomenon that has kind of ruined things. It's it's tough. I don't want to. I'm not trying to be too hard on like Hearthstone specifically or whatever, right? There are some decks that have really unintended interactions that are way too easy to just like absolutely dumpster people with. And those should be nerfed on day one. But the difference between that and just kind of like going after a fair deck, but it is solved, versus in an environment where everyone is playing bad shit because nobody knows what the new meta is like. I don't know. It's tough.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Luna chat says the only thing I noticed was that they might want to adjust the damage reduction after a perfect parry. It feels really unsatisfying at current levels. I can see that. So, buddy, for your benefit, right now, perfect parrying gets you a free like if you time the parry perfectly, you get a combo off of it, but it gets combo scaling. I'm not sure of the specifics of it, but essentially, as the combo goes on, each iterative attack does less damage is to keep like essentially from you being blown out by a single touch of death. The perfect parry introduces a level of combo scaling from the start of the combo, and so Lou the chat says feels bad when perfect parries aren't easy. That is absolutely true, and also kind of like antithetical to some of the stuff that like the most famous Street Fighter moment is probably it's called like Evo Moment 37 or something like that.
Oh, where he parries every one of Chun-Li's kicks.
Yeah,
at 1 health. Yeah,
yeah, and so like doing really well off of a perfect parry should feel like an achievement. And I don't quite know why they decided to do that drop off. Maybe just to keep newer players from getting like styled on by like better players, but we'll see. I could see them easing off of it a little bit, but I think damage reduction is so that like to keep kind of like, because the thing you don't want is a perfect parry to turn into like a touch of death, right? Like because like that encourages kind of like a very defensive play where like you're not really going for attacks because a single perfect parry ends your game and ends the round. And so I see why they did that, but I think I agree with Lou that like it feels bad. I don't know really know how you solve that. Maybe introduce so Street Fighter 3 had a red parry, which was like an even harder to hit timing, but it like did better. Maybe you could introduce something like that, but we'll see. We'll see. I still think the game's super fun, and I think it's got a lot of legs, so I'm going to keep playing.
Okay, we're super out of time, but I do just want to ask, what do you think about this Apple Pro thing that got
the ski goggles?
Yeah.
So my reaction was all of the neck pain of the Oculus with all of the social stigma of the Google Glass.
Oh my god, that's pretty great.
It is $3,500, right? Like, so if the pitch, if it's as smooth as they're saying it is, right? And this was always the thing that I thought virtual reality would be good for, right? Like, instead of having 3 screens, right? Like, I have one virtual reality goggles and as many desktop, as many virtual screens as I want, right? Mm-hmm. If they can pull that off, maybe, right? Like, otherwise, I don't know. Also, like, as weird as it's going to sound, I don't know if like Mac's the right system for this, right? Like, sure, it's neat, but like, why? Like, who is this for? Right? Like, do like graphic designers need like 72 monitors? Like, when like I can buy 3 monitors for much less than $3,500, right? Like, if it costs like the same price as my monitor, I would replace it, without a second thought. But like, I just don't see the use case, and maybe I'm wrong, right? Like, Apple makes good tech, right? Like, I just don't see the use case. But we'll see.
We'll see. Okay, cool. Well,
do you have a thought?
My thought is it looks so fucking dumb, and I just want to like bully everyone who wears them because they look like the dumbest nerds. I don't know. It just every picture of it looks fucking so stupid. I can't take it seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
The guy who was the press dude from like there's a guy who I think was like the press secretary for President Nixon, like runs the Richard Nixon Twitter account. Obviously, it's like not real because Richard Nixon's dead. But he tweeted today is like if Steve Jobs was alive, he'd have like hangings in the middle of San Francisco until it was fixed.
Wow. Damn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is somebody said that this is going to define Tim Cook's legacy. If it lives or fails, and I think that might be right. So we'll see.
Wow, that is a bit. Yeah, that's a big call. I don't know. It's tough. It's like we don't appreciate how much the iPhone truly changed the world, right? Like, I think looking back now, I think it is real to say that the iPhone and, like adjacent smartphone technology is like a paradigm shift that we are still unprepared for the consequences for, right? Like the history in 100 years is going to talk about the release of the iPhone the same way that like in history classes today, we talk about, I don't know,
The
fucking
printing press, the light bulb.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. Um, there is there's not a world where I see this stupid goggles thing being talked about, right, in 100 years. I don't know. It seems like I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
So this stream is for adults, but about the iPhone thing, I recently listened to a podcast that described like the post smartphone world as like we are insta-gooning ourselves. Because so like with the idea being that like even when we're like with friends, we pull out our phones and like get a hit of dopamine on Twitter or whatever, right?
Yep.
Like, and that's the equivalent of like gooning ourselves to death.
I don't want to define gooning for the chat. I feel like it has to be defined though. You know what? Look it up. Don't actually is my recommendation. Do not
on a work computer. Do not in front of anybody who you care about judging you. I will, Lucius terms say it has something to do with it is a pornographic term, like literally pornographic. So,
insta gooning ourselves. Wow,
yeah.
that's a bleak worldview. But I get it. I definitely get it. Yeah.
All right. So we've run way over, but
there you go. Diablo 4 and thoughts on like everything in between.
Yeah. If you'd like to email us with your thoughts on what we talked about on this podcast, email us at derpsgames@gmail.com or podcast@derpsgames.com. You can watch the twitch.tv/@some_derpsgames or youtube.com/ no, I think it's twitch.com/derpsgames or youtube.com/@some_derpsgames where these go out live. We've got rate and review us on iTunes, Spotify, all the good places. We have a Patreon, all the links in the description. That's everything I've got. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to promote?
I have nothing that I'm looking to promote.
Well, in that case, I'll say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal